Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to another Supatease video. And in this one, we've got some big class changes, some pretty big buffs and nerfs to a lot of specs for both PvE and PvP. And of course, as always, if you want to stay up to date with the changes related to World of Warcraft, smash that subscribe button. Your support is greatly appreciated. But let's get started. For Demon Hunters, your Sigil of the Flame damage is going to be reduced by 10%. This is both Havoc as well as Vengeance, so just a small nerf on this ability. A little bit of implication in PvP, but not really a lot. For Havoc specifically, Collective Anguish talent damage summoned by Fell Devastation reduced by 10%. People were already not playing this. They were playing Elysian Decree, so kind of rough to see that, at least when it comes to PvP. And doesn't really affect their damage in PvP because people aren't running this at the moment. Rage Fire talent, damage stored from Immolation or critical strikes, has been reduced to 30% from 35%. Now, this is a talent that players play in PvP, so it's going to be a little bit less damage here for Havoc. And a Fire Inside talent, chance to reset Immolation aura, has been reduced to 25%, down from 30%, slightly less frequency. So a very minor amount of reductions to Havoc overall when it comes to PvP. Now, in PvE, this probably does have some pretty big implications, I would imagine, for things like Mythic Plus, but in PvP it's going to be very minor. For Devastation Evoker, Pyre is getting a 15% damage increase, but not in PvP. Pyre pretty much is only applicable during Dragon Rage when you activate it, but it's not going to be even getting that. Damage of all spells and abilities increased by 3%, but not in PvP, so net no change for Devastation in PvP, but in PvE possibly some Pyre builds, or Pyre just being more desirable is definitely likely. Preservation Evoker, Resonating Sphere once again applies echo to the first 5 allies it passes through. Previously it was 3. A Resonating Sphere was recently reduced as a part of broad AoE healing reduction pass. After watching the change play out, we're not happy with the resulting gameplay, particularly in dungeons where it doesn't cover your whole party. So I like this when they're able to make a change, see how it plays out, realize that it's not working out, and revert it. I feel like this is something that is a very important component for the health of the game. You know, not making a change and then being afraid of like, oh no, I made a mistake. I don't want to highlight that it was a mistake, so we're just going to leave it the way that it is. Or, you know, maybe being insecure about the change being wrong, because sometimes you got to do something a little bit different and see how it plays out, and then be willing to backtrack on it. So honestly, overall, I think this is a really healthy post, although it's not a really big implication, especially to PvP. I think this is a really healthy part of the post. For Mage, Arcane Blast is getting a 6% damage increase, and Arcane Missiles are getting a 10% damage increase, but not in PvP. So PvE mages rejoice, you're seemingly getting a lot of buffs. Fire is getting a 12% increased damage to Fire Blast, 5% to Pyro Blast, 10% to Fireball, and 12% to Flame Strike, which will be in PvP. I don't know if that's enough to really make any Flame Strike builds viable. It's probably not. Intensifying Flame now increases Ignite damage by 25%, up from 15%. Now, Fire Mages, let me know if this is something that you can actually take in PvP, because this is a significant amount of Ignite damage. If this is something that you can actually grab, because it looks like it will be in PvP as well. So maybe possibly a slight buff here for Fire in PvP. For Frost, Frostbolt damage gain buff by 15%, Ice Lance is by 12%, Flurry is by 10%, and Glacial Spike is by 6%, but not in PvP. So again, for PvE, you're going to be feeling pretty good about that, but not so much for PvP. We'll have to see for the PvP specific changes later on if Mage is going to be touched at all. For Windwalker Monk, we continue to keep an eye on Windwalker damage and feel they need a second incremental improvement to their relative performance. This round of tuning focuses on payoff for successfully executing the bonus effects of the Mystic Heron's Discipline tier set, as well as increasing the damage of rotational Chi Spenders in Rising Sun Kick and Fist of Fury. So Spinning Crane Kicks gain a 20% damage increase. I don't feel like you use this frequently in PvP at the moment. At times this has been a very critical ability. Maybe 20% is enough to make builds around it more viable, but I'm kind of doubting that it will. Blackout Kick is getting a 10% damage buff, which will likely be felt as you are using this frequently, although it's not your main burst ability. Still, a damage increase overall is better than nothing. Rising Sun Kick is getting an 8% increase, but not in PvP. Fist of Fury is getting an 8% increase, but not in PvP. And Blackout Reinforcement has been increased to 250%, up from 200. So Blackout Kick getting changes to be a lot more powerful in PvP, which hopefully gets Windwalker into a place where it doesn't feel like it's either popping Serenity and one-shotting someone for no reason and then doing nothing. I feel like Windwalker, they've done changes and improvements to a lot of specs. I think Unholy is the most recent one, where it was rotating out of their cooldown damage and making them just feel good all of the time, which I think have had really good effects and felt really good on those classes. Windwalker is one that's still lingering behind in that regard, in terms of catching it up to feel powerful outside of cooldowns and not like it only needs cooldowns. And this is a change that could get them into that direction, but probably needs more. Glory of the Dawn damage increased by 12%. Dance of Chi-Ji bonus increased to 300% from 200. I'm unsure what Dance of Chi-Ji is, but if that has anything to do with spinning crane kick, that's a pretty big number around it. So possibly you want to be looking at these talents on your Windwalker on Tuesday. For Mistweaver Monk, Unison now heals a second injured ally for 35% of the amount healed, down from 50%, but will not apply in PvP. Enveloping Breath healing reduced by 10%, but will not apply in PvP. And Essence Font healing reduced by 8%, but not in PvP. So Mistweavers, you're not going to be feeling any of these nerfs. Retribution Paladins, you are getting a 3% damage buff. The 3% damage guy is back. I don't know if he's just going to be in every post, but this will be felt in PvP as well. So just 3% damage to Rets. Shadow Priest, Psychic Link now causes direct damage spells to inflict 25% of their damage on all other targets affected by Vampiric Touch. This is 10% up from 15. Of course, this is good math. I think it's probably more than 10%. But a buff to Psychic Link, it might be worth exploring this talent. I think it's likely better in things like RBGs or AoE than Arena with smaller group sizes of targets to dot up and spread this damage out to, but maybe not. Maybe it actually will be good in smaller group as well. Maybe this is enough of an increase, so keep an eye out on that one. For Holy Priest, 3% healing increase, but the 3% guy says no, not you in PvP. I feel like Holy Priest, 3% wouldn't have been too bad to let that one go through on Holy Priest, so I'm a bit surprised to not see that one. Prayer Mending healing increased by 15, not applied in PvP. Now, I could see this one being more fair to not let it apply moving through. But Holy Priest not getting much love here, at least on these top side changes. For Rogue, Assassination, all ability and melee auto attack damage reduced by 3%, but will not apply in PvP combat. Now, Rogues are big outliers when it comes to PvE. I'm honestly surprised it's only Assassination being looked at here, not Outlaw and Subtlety, and such a minor overall change to it as well. For Shaman, Elemental, Earthquake damage is getting increased by 50%. Unlikely that you're really going to use it for damage in PvP still, but again, in Mythic Plus, I'm sure that this will be met with rejoice, I would think. For Enhancement, Elemental Warding now reduces magic damage taken by 3 and 6%, up from 2 and 4. This is getting very close to numbers that Demon Hunters have for magic damage reduction. This is aimed at improving Enhancement survivability in all content. Now, Shamans have a lot of talents they need to take, though, so it might be difficult to justify taking this with how much utility you need to be swapping constantly between, but it might be worth taking this in like caster situations where you got double casters on you. 6% damage reduction is definitely a lot better than nothing. For Restoration Shamans, Torrent now increases the heal of Riptide, the initial heal of Riptide, by 15 to 30, but will not apply in PvP combat. Again, buffs for these healers that are a bit weaker and not making them go through PvP combat. Healing Surge increased by 12%, but not in PvP, and Healing Stream Totem increased by 12%, but not in PvP. I feel like letting the casted healing buffs go through would have at least been good. Again, the casted healing I think is healthy for the game. I could justify like Riptide as being instant and unavoidable, but there's other healers like Paladin that just spam Holy Shock, or Resto Druids that just keep Life Bloom up without casting for prolonged periods of time, where it's like it's really unfair when you're facing them in PvP. So Resto Shaman not seeing those, at least. For Affliction, Seed of Corruption is getting a 10% damage increase. That's probably not going to matter in PvP. Soul Rot is going to apply to 4 targets, up from 3. And Dark Harvest is now going to increase your critical strike and haste by 4% per target, up from 2.5. Let's see if there's any compensation on the PvP side, because right now those are applying to PvP as well. For Destruction Warlock, Rain of Fire damage increased by 12%. You're not playing that PvP, so it's not going to matter. Cataclysm damage increased by 25%. Again, not playing that PvP. Even with the buff, I feel like you're still not. Immolation damage from Infernal and Blasphemy increased by 25%. Now, that will be felt. I wonder if like the spawning Infernal builds might actually be better. I just got 2,400 on my lock, and that's making me think of possibly, trying Blasphemy build for a little bit of AoE damage. Just Immolate's getting a 10% damage buff. Was not thinking Destro really needed buffs, at least particularly on damage. For player versus player, the Trinket bonus, primary stat for DPS and tank specializations, is increased by 12%, down from 20 when in arenas, battlegrounds, and war mode. That is a huge DPS decrease. That is an 8% reduction in agility and intellect. This is going to slow the game down a huge margin. Now, with a change like this, which is likely appropriate for solo shuffle, taking into account that dampening scales at a different pace in 3v3, means that 3v3 is likely going to be really, really slow. But shuffle will probably feel good. So either they need to, you know, consolidate the dampening to the same pace in both brackets to account for this, because I'm really worried about the 3s bracket with a change like that. Such a significant drop in main stat for all DPS specs. For balanced druids, the backlash damage of Stellar Flare is getting increased by 8%. Not a really big deal. Regrowth healing for Feral Druid is no longer reduced by 20%, so more regrowth healing on Feral Druids. Marksmanship Hunter is getting a 15% increase to aim shot, now 40% additional damage. Rapid Fire is getting a 10% up to 30% for additional damage. Now again, for Marksman, I feel like it did need a little bit of a tune-up in damage from the changes they made from its set bonus, but I feel like survivability is still kind of the main culprit for them. They're similar to Rep Paladins, you know, pre-rework in terms of defense. But this is gonna be scary for the mages. It's definitely gonna be scary for the mages. Plate classes, you probably still don't care, but scary for the mages. Holy Priest, you are gonna be ultimately getting some love. Your mana regeneration is getting increased by 10%. This is absolutely necessary. I feel like it's definitely, at least in Shuffle, gonna put you on more of an even playing field with the rest of the healers. For enhancement, you got those defensive buffs up there. What are you gonna get down here? Healing Surge. Healing is now increased by 5% in PvP. It was previously reduced by 12, so this is a net change of 17% roughly. And Control the Lava Flame Shock Backlash is going to be increased by 8%. So, you know, more self-healing or more healing in general and more personal defense. For Elemental, Searing Flames now has a 40% chance to generate Maelstrom in PvP combat down from 100. And Rolling Magma is now 60% in PvP effective in PvP combat. Control the Lava also getting an 8% damage increase. So likely focusing around the Flame Shock build and trying to bring down some of the potency of that, as it's doing a remarkable amount of damage. Now, the impact of these, again, I'm not 100% certain of what Rolling Magma is, but these seem like big numbers around these, and I wonder, you know, the implications if this means that shamans will play around casting spells more or not. I'm kind of leaning on the side of not, but definitely targeting that build, I think, in particular. For Restoration Shaman, Healing Tide Totem's health is getting increased by 30%. Healing Tide is kind of the ability where if you're putting it down in a spot where it can die, it's already not really getting value, but I mean, it's better than nothing, certainly. But I was kind of expecting a little bit more here. For Rogue Subtlety, the 2-piece bonus is now 30% effective in PvP combat, down from 50, and Eviscerate damage has been reduced by 7.5%, so a little bit less one-shot damage. Still probably got the cheese mechanics around Smoke Bomb and Shadowy Duel. I think those are more of the main culprits for, you know, what is causing Subtlety to be so powerful at the moment, especially for healers that don't have mechanics that deal with it. I'm thinking Preservation Evoker. For some reason, Emerald Communion doesn't heal through Shadowy Duel or Smoke Bomb, but other like AoE heals like Healing Tide Totem do. So maybe like, you know, standardizing the healer AoE effects so that they can heal through those effects and save and time those cooldowns would be better for the gameplay element of it. But definitely Subtlety Rogue needed to be looked at. For Affliction, your Unstable Affliction backlash damage is getting increased by 8%, and Dark Harvest is now 75% effective in PvP combat. I think that was the buffs to the haste that we saw up above. So, you know, it's probably just equally compensated, and you're getting a little bit more backlash to spell protection. For Destruction, Chaos Bolt's actually getting a 5% nerf, and Shadow Burn is getting a 5% nerf, and Flashpoint is now 50% less effective in PvP, or 50% flat out less effective in PvP combat, so less haste. So while Immolate is going to be doing more damage, you're going to have less haste. I mean, Destro was good, but was it that good? Like, I feel like Destro is getting the nerf that Subtlety Rogue needed to get. Maybe it's not that bad. 5%. Maybe it's not that bad. Overall, I like that they're still, you know, keeping tabs on the game, touching up some specs that needed some assistance. I think could be maybe a little bit more targeted towards the specs that we're struggling with. Hopefully we see some more reworks moving into the future. I feel like Windwalker and Frost DK need to be the ones, at least for PvP, where they're focused on trying to drive damage out of the cooldowns of those classes and more into their sustained spells. But I'll be doing probably a tier list update with regards to these changes and how it's all played out. So make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out. But other than that, thank you very much for watching the video, and I will see you in the next one.